Okay, so we're going to be talking about assessments. I just got out of Nicole Hartong's session, and she mentioned assessments too, and said some things that I might repeat because I just felt like they really made a lot of sense. So I took some notes. Um, let me just. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to put it in the chat. I have it open. I'll try to keep watching the chat. And of course, there's lots of people here from the team who can help me too. Um, so today we're going to be talking about the different types of assessments, and then we're going to be kind of deep diving a little bit on formative assessments and then summative assessments. We're going to be talking a bit about can-do statements. We're going to take a deeper dive on IPAs, although I know you had a session on IPAs and the authentic materials earlier, but we're going to do it again in this context. And then we'll be talking a bit about how you can create your own assessments. Really what this session is doing, like one big part of it, is making sure that you all know, kind of our intentions with the different materials within Voces, because it's not always clear or it's not always obvious, especially if you're new to Voces. One thing that I took note of in Nicole's session just now was that she was like, when I first started Voces, I didn't like she was using interpretive tasks as assessments. And she's like, they're not called assessments. And I was thinking, well, a lot of things in VOCES can be used as assessments and they're not called assessments. So hopefully this session kind of brings to light like all the many ways that you can use the materials either as assessments or as practice. So in the chat, please complete this can do. It's like it's a pre-assessment. So the can do is I can identify a wide assortment of assessments in VOCES or otherwise, both formative and summative, that I can use to evaluate my students' comprehension during all phases of their learning process. So if you can put an answer to that in the chat, like I need help, I'm almost there, yes, I can, and I can do this and more. And just to note, nice, I'm glad that you guys can, woohoo. And if you can do it very well and you have anything to share along the way, please do. Because really, the other side to all this is like, VOCES can be used in so many different ways. The materials, I mean, I just learned a whole bunch of new ways that Nicole uses the materials that we never intended, and like she approaches it in a way that we didn't intend. And it's a beautiful way. So again, along the way, if you have anything to share with others, please put it in the chat or even unmute yourself and share. But good. It seems like you guys are almost there or far and beyond, like above and beyond. So also in the chat, identify or put in the chat one assessment that you currently use, and it can be summative or formative, or that you plan to use this year, and maybe label it formative or a summative. So maybe it's a quiz like in the Our Story series, and I'll be showing, or not the Our Story, in the Voices of the World series, we have quizzes, like pretty traditional ones, unit tests, drawing pictures for the stories you did. I love that, Laura. And then we have like the tool that allows you to have them upload the picture if you want to do that. Unit test, that's great. The chapter test. Ooh, a cultural reading in Puentes is a summative assessment. I love that, JJ. The IPA, which we'll talk about. And no, it's not just beer. Um, so I like this meme here, like when the cook tastes the soup, it's formative assessment, kind of testing it, right? And when the customer tastes the soup, that's summative assessment. So it's like kind of the final, something to keep in mind. So as we've already established, there are formative and summative assessments. Formative will be monitoring student learning. It's ongoing. It's something that occurs maybe multiple times within a class period. It's during teaching. It's quick feedback. It's kind of getting a read on student comprehension or understanding. It might inform you on what you do next or what you do like the next minute or the next day. And it can help you troubleshoot student weaknesses. And it's low stakes or no points sometimes, just kind of getting a feel and reading the room in a sense. Summative, on the other hand, is evaluating student learning. It's more infrequent or not as frequent. It's usually administered at the end of the unit or at the end of like some period of time, and you're getting a sense of, you know, what worked, like what they retained and what maybe you might do differently next time, or maybe it might tell you that you need to reteach things. And it's usually high stakes or has a grade, at least. So let's look at more in depth on formative assessment. So, um, so there's on the spot, exit tickets, assignments, and quizzes. We're going to go over each one. So first up, on the spot. So I asked JJ to maybe demo a few of these, or at least discuss them a bit from, you know, using examples from your own classroom.
So thumbs up, thumbs down is just, yes, you've got it. No, you need more help, right? How are we doing? Are we good? Or do we need more help? That's super, 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 super easy. I also tell students to use their thumb as their gas gauge. So how much energy do they have? If their energy is low, I know that I need to go a lot slower, right? If their energy is high, I know I need to build in more active, more energizing things for them. Rate with your fingers. Show me, like I'm trying to put my fingers in front of my camera so that you can actually see them. A 1 is, are you with me 100%? Or I'm sorry, do you need a lot of help? 2, are you kind of in the middle? 3, you're with me 100%. You understand everything that's being said, right? Rate with your fingers. And you can do up to 5. You know, you pick the ratings. I also like to do, everyone put your heads down and close your eyes and raise your hand. Everybody raise your hand at the same time. And I want you to show me on your hand, how confident are you with what we have acquired today? A 0 to a 5. A 5 means you're super confident, you're ready to move forward. And a 0 means, nope, we need to back up. I need more of this. I need more repetitions. And this is super, super low stakes because no one can see what they're doing because everybody's heads are down and eyes are closed. So students feel confident in letting you know what they can do. Let's see. I also set up a gesture in my class that makes a sound that students can do if they don't understand something, or if they see that someone has a question, or if I'm cold calling students and they're like, uh-oh, they do this to me, and I'm like, oh, you were checked out, weren't you? So I need to come back to you in a minute after you've had a chance to catch up, right? And so it's a real easy way for them. They don't have to say a word. They can just be like, boom, I'm not with you. And I know that I can move on and to someone else and come back to them. So, but it's a really good way for them to know that I'm not mad at you for zoning out for a minute because it started snowing and it's the first snow of the year and it's gorgeous outside and you want to be outside playing instead of in my classroom. I want to be outside playing instead of in my classroom too, right? So it's just a gentle way of doing that. You can use whiteboards if you have one-to-one whiteboards in your classroom, or just a piece of paper, or create your own whiteboard with a piece of paper inside of a plastic sleeve that they can write on in a dry erase marker, and they can flash the answer up that way to let you know what they're understanding. As far as observing student behaviors and interactions, that's kind of what we call teach to the eyes, when their eyes are glazed over. And I have just been, y'all know about this already, but I have just learned that there's a name for what students are doing to us in the classroom, and it's called the Gen Z stare. And it's that total blank stare where they're not going to show you that they're not even going to acknowledge that you spoke to them, right? Has anybody else been seeing that on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram about the Gen Z stare? It's a little bit harder to teach to those eyes because those kids just are not, they're just not going to show you what they're doing. But in general, you can observe their behaviors. If they were engaged 10 minutes ago and now they're not, and they're all slumped in their chairs and their heads are drooping, well, you know that they're not getting it because it's not compelling. It's not interesting. So teach to the eyes, just observe their behaviors. Their body language will tell you way before their brain tells their mouth to tell you what they're doing. Um, you might just do, if you're chunking your material, um, you might just do like a 5 question summary real quick of what you did over the last 10 minutes. Like we just did calendar talk for the first 10 minutes of class. Well, I'm going to throw 3 to 5 questions at them. And if they can all choral response together, and I hear the majority of their voices, I know that they got it and that I can move on. Anything else? I have a
Those
note
are
here.
great examples.
I can't read what my note says. Something about intentionally, something, when you're doing those quick summaries after each segment of your class, I intentionally throw in an incorrect detail. Like if we're doing calendar talk, oh, today is Wednesday. Yes, just to see if they're paying attention. They're like,
That's a
yes. And
good
then they're like,
idea.
no, today's not Wednesday, it's Tuesday. So,
I love that. Also, there is a question. When you do
yeah.
on the spot in class and most are a three, I guess like what do you offer or suggest that day as next steps for the ones and twos? So like if most people seem to be getting it, but there's a few stragglers sort of.
So those ones and twos are your barometer students. Those are the students that you're teaching, that you're paying attention to and making sure that they're getting it. And I, if they're going to be open and honest with me that they're ones and twos, I'm going to make sure that I get more repetitions in. And maybe if the majority of a class is a three, I maybe I'm not going to back up and reteach the whole thing, but I'm going to make sure I position myself near that student so I can check on them more frequently. I maybe ask a few more questions and I make sure I have eye contact with them so that they can let me know, yes, I've got it, or no, I still don't have it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I
Yeah.
feel like the on the spot assessments is like part of the orchestration of the class, like you're aware of all these minds and you're more aware of these and but you're getting that input. So that's great. Thank you, JJ. That was super
Yeah,
useful.
you're welcome.
Another formative assessment type can be exit tickets. Again, Nicole was just talking about exit tickets, and I think they came up earlier today elsewhere too, and they are in Voces. So I do want to, this is where I was saying, I'm going to jump out and not jump out, but like I'm going to stop sharing and then share Voces so that you guys can see where they are. You might already use your own, but they are in Voces. Um, in the resources section. So in any of the titles, if you go to the teachers, like if you log in and then you go to the teachers panel and then resources, they'll be usually toward the end. Sometimes I see them and don't actually, am I like looking right? Oh, here they are. And they are in Spanish in the Spanish titles and in French in the French titles, etc. And you can download them and there's different ones, depending on your use of them, but you can print them out and hand them out and get a good read on how students felt about like the lesson for that day, etc. Um, and then one second. JJ, is my internet being weird or is that just me?
No, I think it's you.
Okay, good. That's fine.
Your voice isn't strange or anything.
Okay.
It all seems to be fine.
So yes, exit tickets can assess for effort, participation by the student, their understanding, how they're feeling about things. We always have these like nice little emojis on ours. Or assessment for their understanding of a lesson and give you some feedback on the pacing or their interest in it. And assignments are another way to provide or to get formative assessment. So um, in Voces and all the titles, there are tons of assignments, and really it's like activities, to be honest. So it's like multiple choice activities, matching, sorting, those are auto-graded. They can be, used in a very low stakes way. And you can, and actually this is a really good, um, I'm going to jump out again. Oh, actually, I'll just move my screen. Do you guys see Voces now? Okay. Um, so in Voces, something to keep in mind is that um, I was setting this up for a session, so let me think for 1 second. So if you go to an activity like I'm now, but really any page where students would submit work, um, and I know I just submitted this as a student. So if you go to any page, including a Can Do pre-assessment page, where students submit work and come up to the teachers panel again and click on quick results, you will see a breakdown of what students like answered for each question. And I know this is a weird example because it's can do statements, but imagine this being like the questions on an activity. You would see these like this bar graph, and it would show you, like in this case, it's only one student as well. In your case, it might be 30 students, but if they just did an activity that you were using to formatively assess them, you would get like a quick read on how students are understanding whether it's a story or a lesson that you just gave on a specific topic, like whatever that activity was about. But this is just a really nice way to get that quick read without getting into like the nitty gritty of the grading right away. So that's something to know. But you can also use the teacher graded options as well. I mean, any kind of questions that just kind of give you a read on how well they're understanding your lesson. And then, of course, there's the very or somewhat traditional quiz that will give you a measure of how they're doing or how they're feeling about the lesson. Um, Quizzes will measure specific learning objectives. They'll demonstrate students' mastery of concepts or a need for you to like maybe reteach or review something. In the R story series, which I'll drag this back over, um, quizzes are a little bit different. So something that, especially if you're new to Voces, it might not be apparent when you first log in and start looking around, but the units are structured in a way that, of course, there's like short stories and long stories. And the short stories have the vocabulary lists and like lots of opportunities for you to introduce those structures to your students. So that's like going to be a lot of hand holding and sort of like doing it with the students in theory with the short stories. But then the long stories, especially in the lower levels, the first two long stories are longer stories that incorporate the structures that were just introduced in those short stories that precede that long story. So the long stories can really be used as formative assessments, they can be administered a bit independently. So maybe you handhold a little bit less, walk them through a little bit less of the story and let them read more independently. And then when they do an activity, like for instance, usually the first one is going to be very input driven, multiple choice like this. That's going to give you a really good read on whether they comprehended the story or not. So this is this is one way to sort of like quiz students in the Our Story series. In the Voices of the World series, the quizzes are called quizzes. So they're more obvious in the table of contents, but let me just show you. And this is the same in French as well. Um, so here they are, here's the section. And as you can see, each quiz focuses on a different like topic that is presented in that chapter. So, and usually they're going to be auto graded and like pretty straightforward in a very nice way, so very succinct and something that the students can do in like 10, 15 minutes, etc. Okay, so that's where they are in each series. And then in the chat, so quick formative assessment, just to model this a bit. which type of formative assessment do you typically use in your classroom? So any that I mentioned, or maybe a different one, which type might you try out or do more of this school year? So maybe you've done exit tickets or want to try exit tickets. Another thing, yeah, exit tickets, all that you mentioned. Yeah, I think we sprinkle, all the formative assessments throughout class. Warm up and calendar talk. Yep, calendar talk's a great one. 5-question exit tickets, which, by the way, you can use the editor to create your own custom exit tickets that students do within the curriculum as well. And really, like the sky's the limit on what you put in those exit tickets. But if you create one in Voces, then you can duplicate it and just tweak it for whatever you need. And that could be a something like a just kind of like one of the things that your students get used to. Like every day at the end of class, like they go into Voces and they complete an exit ticket. Tomorrow at 1 p.m., Kelsey is going to be talking about editing in the platform. And if you're interested at all in editing, I highly recommend that session. And yeah, Miriam, you like to do different ones so that they don't get bored. Yeah, keep it mixed up, keep it interesting. Okay, so then summative assessments are things like tests, writing assessments, and integrated performance assessments. And we have all 3 in Voces. So we'll explore that a bit. So tests, again, this is kind of like drawing your attention to things that are sometimes missed. So one of my favorite resources in the Our Story series are these unit assessments, or we call them, I think, unit evaluations. Let me get back to that. And we have them in all the titles, like all the Our Story titles. And the unit evaluations are, and actually this kind of answers your question, Beatrice. The unit evaluations, first of all, where they are is at the end of every unit. So I'm just showing you here, like in unit 2, if you scroll down to the very end, there's the unit evaluation for unit 2, and there's a vocabulary section, and it's very kind of straightforward, assessing students' vocabulary, like the vocabulary from that unit. And then there's going to be a reading, which I believe Brian Candle wrote these. Brian Candle has written many of our Spanish stories throughout Voces. And then there will be a writing like prompt, and then culture. And the culture will relate to the country or countries being explored in that unit. So these are unit evaluations. So first, let me just say, like, these are kind of straightforward, and if they're like good for teachers who, there's different options for assessment for every unit, and these are kind of like the straightforward. You can assign it, have the students do it very independently, and assess how well they have acquired the language from that unit, basically. So that's one way to use them. We created these actually during the pandemic when teachers were really like having groups of students who had all sorts of like different proficiency levels. And even if they had, like finished Spanish 3, they still seemed like they were Spanish 1, so it was just a very tricky time, as we can all remember. So we created these also as somewhat as like a place, what is that word? Like placement tests. Thank you. So that kind of like they're somewhat like they could be used as pre-test too, if you want. Like you could use the vocabulary assessment as a pre-test or as a placement test. Um, and yeah, we'll talk about the pre-assessments too, Patricia, in a moment. But these are just wonderful, like the material in these sections of the unit evaluations all relate directly to the vocabulary and themes that will be taught in that unit or have been taught in that unit, depending on when you use it. But it's like, but you don't have, it's not testing you on like specific stories in the unit or anything. So again, they can be used before a unit, after a unit, or in between. So they're a great resource for that reason. And then in the Voices of the World series, there are pretty traditional unit exams that also because of the editor and just like the flexibility of Voces could be repurposed in different ways. But as you can see, like in chapter 3, here's the chapter 3 exam, there is always 100% auto-graded exam. This was very important to us that, teachers would have this option for that immediate grade. They didn't have to, grade it themselves, and the students would get immediate feedback. So there's that, and then there's always also a speaking or writing prompt as well for the exam. So those are the more traditional exam or tests, and they're always targeting different modalities and assessing the content knowledge from that unit. Then we have writing assignments. So this is something where we put those in the Our Story series. I mean, well, they're in the other series too, but I'll show you in a minute. But they have they assess the student's ability to synthesize content knowledge, and it links to their proficiency levels. And for lower levels, you could also have students draw and caption, which I think was something that was put in the chat earlier and mentioned in previous sessions. So let me just show you really quick where that is, especially in the Our Story series. It's clear, but sometimes it's missed. So let's see. In the table of contents here, it's end of the unit review and assessment. So you're always going to have a page with all the structures from the entire unit, broken down into sections, like types of words. So that's something where students could review the words, or just like could even refer to it as they write if you would like to allow that. And then there's the prompt that basically is saying, like, now you've read a whole bunch of stories, now you get to write your own story. And then there's even a prompt for having them read their story, or, for speaking. So that's in all the Our Story series titles. And then we had the integrated performance assessments. So you guys have touched on this. I mean, there's a whole session on them. So I might be repeating some of that, but these are my personal favorites, and they are in all of our titles, or almost all of our titles. They reflect real world situations. They incorporate authentic resources. They assess various modes of communication in a contextualized and cultural way. And they're integrated. So like the first task builds into the next, and then even builds into the third. So they can be really fun, in my opinion. In the chat, can you explain the difference between formative and a summative assessment and give examples of each? Yes, no? You don't have to go into detail, but. Oh, yes, good. Yeah, you don't have to actually tell me the difference, but good. And it is important, though, to keep that in mind, because formative really informs teaching. Yes, I just read that. That's great. And then summative, it informs teaching as well, but in a different way. And formative can really lead to some quality summative assessments. Um, so let's dig a little deeper into IPAs, just to make sure that we're on the same page with them. I took a lot of this, by the way, from this wonderful section on IPAs that Justin added to the Voces titles, because we do get a lot of questions about them. And so if you go into any title and you go up to the introduction in that title, and then to the teacher resources section, you will see an authentic communicative tasks and integrated performance assessments section. And you'll basically see a lot of the information that I'm going to be presenting on the slides. So let me break it down a little bit for you, but that's there for you to refer to anytime. So what is an authentic communicative task? Okay, so first of all, like a step back, just briefly, but so the IPAs are the assessment at the end of the units, but there are materials, which are the authentic communicative tasks, that are woven in to the unit itself within the story sections, as interpretive or presentational tasks, etc., that are preparing students for the IPA. So an authentic communicative task is a type of communication that a speaker of a language might do outside of a classroom setting So it's authentic, something that people do as part of life outside of language learning rather than an exercise that would normally be done only to practice a language or to assess linguistic knowledge. So it's going to be like, we're going to ask students to imagine themselves, doing these things and using the language to maybe solve problems or understand a resource. Let me see. So these communicative tasks include interpretive reading and listening, interpersonal writing and speaking, and presentational writing and speaking. And I just want to show you really quick in a title, sort of like what they look like contextualized in the directory. So I'll look at Unit 2. This is, I think, New Oyster Story at 1. Um, so if you click on like a short story section, and again, this would be the same in French or in any other level, you'll see as you scroll down, maybe not in that one. Oh, no, you do. The interpersonal writing section. So here we have a communicative task. It's exploring a topic or using or asking students to use language that relates to the short story that they just read. But it is like more authentic. It's not just a comprehension activity. Not that that's not doesn't have its own uses and value. But it is definitely preparing and is going to reflect a bit what they will be asked to do in the IPA. So if we look a little bit farther in like short story 2, we have an interpretive reading. These are the new ones, so they're really broken down well with a preparation section and then the actual authentic resource and the assessment with that. And so we can keep looking, and I won't go too far, but here's a presentational speaking. But as you can see, there are different communicative tasks addressing the different modes of communication and exploring themes and using the language that students will be expected to use and explore in the IPA at the end. But in completely new tasks and with new authentic resources. So again, if you're going to use the IPAs, I would highly recommend that you use the communicative tasks ahead of time in the units, at least some. And, that's where formative assessment can come in because you can kind of assess how students are feeling about it. So yeah, I kind of moved ahead, but to reiterate, these communicative tasks tie into a story that came right before it. They usually come right after the comprehension activities. They provide useful real world practice and prepare students for the IPA. Very important. Um, so IPA, and I'm missing the chat. Oh, I like that. I love choice. That you give them choices on the IPAs, one of each. So yeah, the IPAs, the integrated performance assessments, are usually made up of 3 or more tasks. One is going to be interpretive, either listening or reading, one interpersonal, writing or speaking, and one presentational, speaking or writing. And just keep in mind for like the lower levels, the interpretive task, and this goes for like the communicative tasks earlier and in the IPA, are going to usually be highly visual text, just like the one we just glimpsed. It was an infographic. Um, and, students don't have to know all the language that's presented in that video or reading. They really, um, in a sense, and this came up, I think, in Nicole's session, but some of the usefulness of the authentic tasks is that it gets students used to being a bit uncomfortable and like gets students used to using contextual clues to understand language and reminds them that they don't have to know every single word or like define or translate in their mind every single word to understand something. Um, so it's good to even tell them that and remind them of that, especially in those earlier tasks as in preparation for the IPA. So benefits of an IPA, again, I kind of already mentioned some of these, but they're well established and respected as an assessment tool. They're varied but consistent. So we have some really cool ones like with video from like Voss, where like the kids are singing and I don't know, like just some really cool ones. Some on baseball, like they'll touch on different interests that students have, and give students like, they basically have students imagine, as I mentioned earlier down there, that they are in a different country and like that gives them confidence to engage with the authentic world and it inspires them to maybe travel to those worlds. And gives learners a variety of ways to shine, and it gives both teachers and students a better sense of the learner's proficiency. Logistics, and please chime in as you probably already are, and I'm kind of missing in the chat, but chime in with your own experience on the logistics of implementing or of giving an IPA assessment. But a few ideas: prepare students, of course, with the authentic communicative tasks earlier on. Emphasize to students how similar those tasks are to the ones in the IPA. Consider, so when in Voces with the IPA, like each page in a sense gets graded, and sometimes with the interpretive task, if I can just jump to one really quick, it's going to be auto graded, or at least parts of it will be. But I recommend considering at least using the interpretive rubrics, or a rubric that you create to grade the IPA. Um, you can um, you can get the rubrics in the resources, or add it actually by editing the page to the page. So there's lots of different ways to do that. If possible, you could administer different sections on different days. And if you do that, then when the students do like the second task, which is usually interpersonal, you would allow them to access the interpretive task from the day before, but not necessarily move on to the presentational task. And you can do all that. You can kind of restrict what they have access to using the assignment tool in Voces, which is actually the topic of the session tomorrow morning, I believe. So yeah, the IPAs are great, and are another form of summative assessment. And then finally, I wanted to touch on can-do statements, and I'll show you in a moment. But so can-do statements are built into Voces, all the titles. And yes, I agree, Linda. IPAs allow students to be more creative. But so can-do statements are emphasized in all stages of instruction within Voces and hopefully in your class. They set a purpose for learning, they guide the instruction of the unit, and allow students to monitor their own progress and identify their own strengths and areas for growth. So at the very beginning of every unit, there is a can-do pre-assessment, and students are able to like you could assign this to students, and you could have them go through and and you could tell them, be honest about what you can do. And of course, all of the cans are like in the target language, like that's kind of assumed. So they can self-assess. They could do it all at once, or you could break it up based on like where you are in the unit. But then once they submit that, as I was showing you guys briefly before, you can see what they all assessed at. So you can get a read on how they're feeling about their proficiency with these tasks by going to that Can Do pre-assessment page in your teacher account after they have completed it in their accounts, and then click on quick results, and you'll be able to see like who and how many students are feeling great about things or less confident about things, etc. And that can really guide how you go through that unit. Then, and here I have to get another tab. I'm signed in as a student somewhere. Hey JJ, can you see this screen? Like I'm looking at Voces.
Yes.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm not sure about the ways of Zoom. So here I am logged in as a student, and I want to show you really quick how the can-dos work from a student perspective. So first of all, this little mountain icon in the directory indicates where our can-do statements are located, or like what activities have them. Of course, you have the power to add the can-dos anywhere you want, or to edit the ones we have. So this one is I can read a story about school in Mexico. So students, read the story, they complete the activity, and I'm not reading these questions, so I'll probably do pretty bad. And then when they click submit, not only do those questions get auto graded in that case, but then the I can statement pops up. So this is like a perfect time for them to be honest with themselves and think, can I read a story about school in Mexico? And I'm seeing a lot of red on mine, so I'm going to say I need help. And that's something that you'll be able to see on your end as a teacher. Not only will you see their grade, which in my case is very bad, but you'll also get to see their self-assessment based on that grade. And then all of those assessments that they, like all the can do statements that they address along the way through the unit are collected in the can do checklist toward the end of the unit. And they'll be able to see, and you'll be able to see too, on your end, where they're self-assessing overall. So you can see like here I self-assessed higher on this task. Here I self-assessed lower. If they say I need help, maybe you have them reread the story or reread it with them and then reassign that activity so that they do it again. So yes, so assessment or those can do statements can be a great way for students to reflect and take real ownership of their learning. And then, of course, as I mentioned along the way, you can create your own assessments, formative, summative, and the can do statements. That's all possible using the editor. Again, Kelsey's going to be talking about that tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Really, I think she'll show you the basics. And it's like once you know where to go and how to like complete one edit, it's basically the same process no matter what you want to edit. But I will also mention, as we keep mentioning, but if you ever have any questions about something, or if you just get stuck, or if you're wondering, can I change that, or how do I edit that, you just let us know and we will absolutely show you how. A lot of times it's just like, a 2-minute call and we can walk you through exactly what to do and then onward and upward with all your editing. Oh yeah, tomorrow at 1. So are there any questions? I said I was going to look at chat and I really haven't. But it looks like you guys are sharing some really good ideas. Oh, and like Elise, I'm looking at that's really cool, what you do with IPAs and the speaking. Yeah, Nilka, there's a pacing guide, although that's a good idea that to have something that you could edit. That was a really good idea. So I may be putting that on our to-do list. So we don't have, no, I just lost your comment. We don't have exactly the like editable template for a lesson plan, although I did that once with a workshop, so I could look it up and email it to you. But what we do have is a pacing guide. So let me just show you that at least, but not in a student account. 1 second. And I'm also sort of trying to think like, is our pacing guide in a Word document? I'll put my email in the chat, and if you want to email me, I can kind of I can direct you to other things that we have for pacing, in planning. But the one thing that we have here is the pacing guide, which we always have two, or most of the time we have two types of pacing guides. One is profile based, so it's kind of dependent on like you get to decide how much are you going to integrate Voces into your day to day. Some teachers, just use it as a supplement. Some teachers like are all in on it. And then we suggest what you should definitely do in every unit based on how much you're using it, basically. So it's a way of kind of understanding and breaking down a unit so that you get the essential stuff and can plug in other things if you want to, if that makes sense. And then the other one is the detailed pacing guide. We always have this for just one unit. And this is like sort of like in a perfect world, if you put everything plugged into time and space, this is a way to put all of those resources together. And I'll scroll down a little bit so you guys can kind of see. But so it incorporates the can do statements, The culture, that's usually at the beginning of the unit, incorporates tips along the way, the exit tickets. So it really shows how everything can be sort of like nested and integrated together. There's even like in the Spanish version, and I think in the French too, like we recommend like kind of like video Friday or like, movie Friday or something. So it's always a movie on Friday, whether it's Profe Loco or a cultural video. So yeah, those are there for you. And then if you email me, I'm happy to send you other resources I might have.